The city of Eryon Prime floated like a crown of glass and fire in the high atmosphere of its world, suspended on colossal pillars of plasma and woven crystal spires. The metropolis shimmered as if the gods themselves had cut a jewel from the heart of a star and left it turning slowly above the clouds. Ships of 100 designs, from living biovessels that pulsed like hearts to iron leviathans blackened by war, curved into holding patterns and found their way to docking rings studded around the capital. Tonight, the air itself seemed heavy with tension. Every light, every hum of the power grids, every gleam of alien banners hanging from the spires whispered the same thing: the galaxy was watching. At the center of this city hung the Eternal Hall, a vast chamber grown and engineered from living crystal, its walls alive with faint pulses of bioluminescence that echoed the heartbeat of the planet. The dome of the hall stretched nearly a mile across, arching into the sky like the shell of some sleeping titan. Within, amphitheater rows spiraled upward, carved to accommodate 47 species, each seat shaped for bodies of crystal, vapor, carapace, fur, scale, and flesh. At the very heart of the hall was a floor of mirrored obsidian, so polished it reflected the faces of those who dared to step upon it. This was the stage where peace or war would be decided. The noise inside was a storm of languages and tones. Hisses of the serpentine, clicking symphonies of the Arthrix, guttural thunder from Titanids, the quiet hum of the amphicrystalline delegates. A cacophony, yes. But beneath it all ran a current of fear, sharp and metallic like blood in the air. They all knew who was coming, and more than that, they knew what was coming with him. The great doors at the far end of the hall began to shift. They were carved from an alloy older than most civilizations present, groaning open as if reluctant to admit what lay beyond. Conversations stuttered, dozens of eyes, lenses, and sensory stalks fixed forward. A hush rippled outward until even the breathing of the delegates seemed too loud. And then, framed in the silver light of Eryon's twin suns, Captain Elias Ward walked in. He was human, and by most measures of the galaxy, unimpressive. His uniform was simple black with muted silver trim, devoid of flamboyant decoration. He carried himself not like a decorated admiral or a flamboyant diplomat, but like a man who had been too long at war, shoulders straight not from pride but from habit. His hair was dark, streaked at the temples, his jaw set in that weathered kind of way that spoke of long nights and harder decisions. He could have blended into any human crowd. The kind of man who might sit beside you at a bar or pass you in a market and never be remembered. But tonight, under the glow of alien suns, he was unforgettable, because he was not alone. From behind him swept a shadow that was no shadow at all. Wings, vast and black as the void, unfurled, filling the doorway until the crystalline walls themselves seemed to recoil from their breadth. Nyx stepped forward, talons striking the obsidian floor with a sound that cut through the silence like a war drum. Her feathers rippled with an oily iridescence, shifting from black to violet to deep plasma blue as she moved. Golden eyes, sharp as burning plasma coils, swept across the amphitheater. Every instinct in every creature present screamed the same thing: predator. The delegates froze, some recoiled, limbs twitching in primal alarm. One Arthrix envoy dropped his ceremonial staff with a metallic clang that echoed far too loud in the stillness. Even the Amphichancellor, whose crystalline form was rumored to have never once betrayed emotion, dimmed faintly, a pulse of deep red flickering at her core. Nyx's presence wasn't just unsettling, it was primal terror given form, ancient memory rising from the blood of prey species scattered across the stars. And yet, Elias reached one hand back without hesitation, brushing his fingers lightly through Nyx's chest feathers. The great raven lowered her head with a strange, intimate grace, leaning into his touch. A low, throaty sound rumbled from her, halfway between a growl and a purr, resonant enough to vibrate the crystal benches. The hall collectively flinched, but Elias's voice cut through. Calm and utterly ordinary. Easy, Nyx, he murmured. They're just nervous. The understatement was almost comical in its audacity. Nervous, no. The chamber was drowning in fear, the kind that made predators coy and prey scatter. Elias's voice was soft, conversational, as if he were speaking to an old friend in a kitchen back on Earth, and Nyx responded not like a beast obeying command, but like a companion understanding comfort. Her wings folded, though they still towered higher than any being present. She gave one single, deliberate click of her beak, and the sound reverberated through the hall like a countdown to disaster. Whispers erupted, translation systems strained. To carry panic across 100 tons. What madness is this? They brought a living weapon of blasphemy, an apex beast in the Eternal Hall. This cannot be permitted. Admiral Kurthik, massive even among the Titans, half rose from his seat, his armor plates rasping against one another like grinding stone. His voice thundered, "Human, you dare desecrate this chamber with a predator. What is this abomination you parade before us?" Elias did not flinch. He stepped further into the hall. Each footfall measured, steady, as if he owned the obsidian floor. His voice carried without force, but with a steadiness that demanded silence. "Her name is Nyx, and she is here as my partner, not as a threat." Laughter harsh, disbelieving spilled from Minister Selk, the serpentine envoy, his sinuous body coiled tighter, scales catching the hall's light in poisonous shimmer. "Partner, do you expect us to believe this? Do you think we are blind to the teeth, to the wings that blot the light from our suns? It is a beast, nothing more." Elias paused at the center of the hall. For a moment, the reflection of man and raven gleamed beneath him, warped by the obsidian floor into a single merged silhouette, wings spreading from his shoulders, gold eyes gleaming above his own. He smiled faintly, though his eyes remained as hard as iron. "If you think she's just a beast, then you don't understand why we're still here. Why did humanity survive?" He lifted his hand. Nyx's head snapped up, golden eyes locking onto the serpentine minister with surgical precision. The hall seemed to constrict, air itself becoming heavy, every being present suddenly aware that one movement from Elias, just one gesture, could unleash something that no armor, no shield, no fleet would ever stop. For one breathless instant, the galaxy remembered what it meant to be prey. And then Elias lowered his hand. Nyx tilted her head, emitted a sound that was unmistakable, not the croak of a raven, not the growl of a predator, but something that carried the cadence of laughter. Cold, mocking laughter. The crystalline walls themselves shuddered with the vibration. Every eye in the hall widened, because whatever that sound was, it wasn't instinct. It was understanding. Nyx wasn't just reacting, she was responding. Elias folded his hands calmly behind his back, as if nothing remarkable had happened. "She understands you," he said simply, "more than you realize." The silence that followed was suffocating. Some delegates shrank back. Others leaned forward, caught between fascination and dread. Chancellor Vera's crystalline form pulsed with a low and certain amber. For the first time in centuries, the Eternal Hall didn't feel eternal at all. It felt fragile. And in that fragile silence, Nyx spread her wings once more, not fully, but just enough for the tips to brush the crystalline walls. The sound was like knives dragged across glass, and sparks of plasma shimmered in her feathers. She looked up toward the dome, her eyes locking on something beyond sight, something above the chamber. Every sensor system in the hall flickered. Screens across the amphitheater blooming with static. Delegates gasped, fumbling with controls. Chancellor Vera leaned forward sharply, her voice ringing like shattering glass. "What is she doing?" Elias turned his gaze upward as well. He frowned, not in fear, but in focus. Then, slowly, very slowly, he smiled. "She's listening." The lights overhead flickered once, just once. But in a hall where nothing was supposed to falter, where every system was built to withstand centuries without failure, it was enough. The implication was a seed dropped into the minds of every delegate present. Nyx hadn't just unsettled their instincts. She had reached into their systems. She had touched their machines. And as the delegates realized it, a murmur spread through the hall like wildfire. Because if that was true, if the raven wasn't merely a predator, but something more, then this was not a summit anymore. It was the beginning of something none of them were prepared for. The first crack in the galaxy's certainty had appeared, and Elias Ward hadn't even raised his voice. The Eternal Hall had been built to withstand the storms of 1,000 civilizations. Its crystalline walls rose like frozen light. Its dome glowed with the pulse of starlight refracted across living prisms. Here, wars had ended. Treaties had been forged, and enemies who once sought each other's extinction had sat in an easy silence under the same roof, but never before had the hall itself trembled at the simple sound of wings. Nyx's feathers brushed the obsidian floor as she unfolded her body to full height, golden eyes glinting like twin suns. The sight of her split the chamber in two. Half the delegates recoiled in terror, the others leaned forward in awe. Whispers erupted in a dozen languages, clicks, hisses, guttural tones. Crystalline notes and orchestra of fear and fascination. Elias Ward stood at her side, his hands clasped calmly behind his back, as though he had brought nothing more alarming than a briefcase. His gaze swept the amphitheater tiers where the galaxy's powers sat. He saw their fear, their disgust, their disbelief. He did not flinch. From the highest seat, Chancellor Vera rose. The Emperor's crystalline body blazed with shifting light. Her every emotion refracted in sharp bursts of color: crimson for anger, amber for warning, violet for doubt. When she spoke, her voice was not one voice but a chord, each note layered, resonant, echoing across the dome. "This chamber is sacred," Vera intoned, striking her staff of living crystals against the dais. The resonance rippled across the floor. "It was not built for intimidation, Captain Ward. It was not built to host predators." Her light flared deep crimson. "Explain yourself." The delegates hissed, clicked, muttered. The word predator tasted like poison in the air. Before Elias could speak, a thunderous clang rang out. Admiral Kurthik of the Titanids stood, towering above his peers. His body was encased in organic armor, each plate scarred by battles carved into legend. Mandibles flexed, voice booming like a war drum. "Predator. That is no mere predator. That is a scourge given flesh." He jabbed a claw toward Nyx. "Do you fools not feel it? The hunger in its gaze. I lost half my fleet to a predator world. My sons died screaming as beasts tore through their armor. And now you bring such vermin here, into the heart of the council." His mandibles clicked furiously. "This is an insult. This is desecration." The Titanid's voice shook the walls. Murmurs flared into shouts of agreement from his allies. Some delegates pounded the railing in furious assent. Others shrank back, unwilling to oppose the admiral. Selk of the Serpentine rose next, his long coils unspooling in a slow, deliberate dance. His scales shimmered like liquid silver, his forked tongue flicking as he tasted the charged air. His voice was a silken hiss, dangerous in its calm. "Admiral Kurthik has furies raw but understandable. My people know predators well. Once, the skies of our homeworld burned with their wings. They hunted us not for sustenance, but for pleasure. My grandmother was devoured while she still lived." His coils tightened with remembered rage. "We remember, and we do not forgive." Selk's silver eyes slid toward Elias. "Perhaps humanity still lives with such beasts because it is too primitive to move past them. You chain your monsters, Captain Ward. You parade them as partners, but a chain can break. And when it does," he bared his fangs in a smile cold as void, "the galaxy will bleed for your arrogance." The hall erupted in overlapping voices. Crystalline tones clashed with guttural roars, sharp insectoid clicks, ululating wails. Some demanded Nyx's removal. Others called for humanity's immediate expulsion from the summit. A few, quieter but no less intense, whispered curiosity. "What bond is this? How can it be possible?" Elias raised a hand. His calm cut through the storm like a blade. Slowly, the chamber stilled, though resentment still smoldered. "You see a beast," he said, his voice carrying evenly through the amphitheater. "You see hunger, blood, teeth. You think she is my weapon, my chain. You are wrong." He stepped closer to Nyx, his reflection merging with hers on the obsidian floor. "She is my partner. Humanity does not stand alone. We never have. From wolves to ravens, from creatures who could have devoured us but instead chose to walk with us, we survived not by domination, but by choosing together." His words struck some like fire, others like mockery. Kurthik let out a low, guttural laugh void of mirth. "Partnership, lies. Predators choose nothing. They consume until nothing remains." Selk's coil slid tighter, his voice dripping venom. "Your species is still primitive enough to mistake submission for loyalty. One day it will turn on you. Perhaps it already has." Vera struck her staff again, her body flaring crimson and violet. "Enough. The eternal hall will not dissolve into threats." Her crystalline voice cracked with warning. "Captain Ward, you will restrain your companion or face removal." At that, Nyx moved, not in fury, not in violence. She tilted her head, feathers rippling. Then, possibly. Her beak opened and a sound emerged, not the scream of a predator, but a low, resonant vibration. It rolled through the chamber like distant thunder, not words, but intent. Delegates froze, insects stilled their clicking, amphor light dimmed, even Kurthika's mandibles ceased their grinding. They felt it, something older than language. Not threat, not submission, but awareness. Elias smiled faintly, his eyes never leaving Nyx. She says you mistake her silence for obedience. He let the words hang, then added softly, it isn't. The hall erupted again, but this time in shock. Gasps, curses, frantic whispers. Some delegates recoiled, others stared with wide and blinking eyes. Was it real? Was the human mad? Had the predator spoken? Kurthik slammed his claws against the railing, his bellows shaking the dome. Blasphemy, trickery. Selk's tongue flicked rapidly, his silver eyes narrowed. Or perhaps a warning. And then Nyx did something unexpected. She laughed. It was not human laughter, not truly, but the sound, low, guttural, rolling with uncanny cadence, shivered down every spine in the chamber. It was the sound of a predator who understood the fear she inspired and enjoyed it. The Eternal Hall had faced wars, betrayals, and blood oaths broken. But never before had its walls echoed with the laughter of a predator. The galaxy would never forget it. The Eternal Hall had erupted like a hive struck with fire. Voices clashed, tones rose to fever pitch, and still the echoes of Nyx's impossible laugh rippled across the crystal dome. Delegates hurled accusations in 100 dialects, demanding explanations, demanding her removal, demanding punishment for humanity's arrogance. Through it all, Elias Ward never moved. His face was stone, but his eyes gleamed with something far more dangerous than anger, certainty. Beside him, Nyx stood tall, feathers ruffling like the shadows of storms, her golden gaze sweeping the amphitheater. It was not defiance, not even intimidation. It was knowing. At last, Chancellor Vera struck her staff again, the sharp crystalline crack echoing through the uproar. Her body blazed crimson to demand silence, then dimmed to a cooler amber. This chamber will recess. The words cut through the tension like a blade of ice. Return to your embassies. We will reconvene at dawn. The session dissolved in chaos. Kurthik stomped from his seat, mandibles clicking, armor plates grinding. Selk coiled sinuously, silver scales flashing, tongue flicking with a predator's patience. Whispers hissed in their wake, plots already forming. Elias and Nyx withdrew in silence, escorted by crystalline guards down a spiraling corridor of living light. The moment the doors to the human quarters sealed behind them, the noise of the hall faded into quiet. Only the low hum of the spire's veins remained, like a distant heartbeat. Elias exhaled, shoulders sagging. Well, he murmured, running a hand through his dark hair. That could have gone worse. They haven't tried to kill us yet. Nyx tilted her head, her eyes reflecting the chamber's glow. She made a soft sound, not the terrible shriek that had frozen the council, but a low, throaty croak, almost like a chuckle. Elias felt it ripple through him, not just in his ears but in his chest. Their bond stirred. It began as a whisper at the edges of his perception, then opened wide like a door swinging inward. Elias blinked, and suddenly he was not only himself. He saw himself through Nyx's eyes, a fragile figure, bones covered in soft flesh, heat rising off him in waves. He smelled his own fear and stubbornness, sharp like iron in the air. He heard his heartbeat, not as thumps within his chest but as vibrations in the floor. And in turn, Nyx felt him. His awareness of her strength, her majesty, the way her feathers shimmered with electricity waiting to be unleashed. He felt her hunger, yes, but it was not hunger for flesh. It was hunger for motion, for freedom, for the next step in a dance older than stars. The bond deepened, and Elias sank into it willingly. Humans had words for many things: intuition, instinct, empathy. None of them were enough for this. What Elias and Nyx shared was not communication in the sense the council understood. It was parallel consciousness out to minds, one current. When Elias thought, Nyx did not hear words, she felt shapes, colors, rhythms. When Nyx moved, Elias did not just watch, he anticipated, as though her talons were extensions of his own limbs. Their awareness overlapped like two rivers flowing into one another, each carrying its own waters, yet impossible to separate once mingled. And deeper still, there were memories. The bond carried Elias somewhere else. He stood not in the crystalline chambers of Eryon Prime, but in a field of tall grass beneath a sky the color of storm. The air was heavy with the scent of rain and soil. Black shapes wheeled overhead, ravens, hundreds of them, their cries echoing like omens. He was a boy again, standing on earth, hearing his grandfather's voice. "Do you know why the raven follows us, Elias?" The boy had shaken his head. "Because once, long before cities, long before machines, humans were prey. We were weak, small, fragile. The wolves could outrun us. The great cats could tear us apart. But the raven warned us. It circled above the grass and told us where the predators lay. It led us to carcasses, to firewood, to shelter. And when we raised our spears, the raven followed, feasting on what we left behind. We survived together. The sky darkened, thunder rolling. The ravens wheeled lower, closer, their eyes catching sparks of gold in the stormlight. Never forget," his grandfather whispered. "Alone, we are fragile. Together, we are more than prey." The memory faded, dissolving back into the glow of Eryon Prime, but the echo lingered, braided into the bond. Nyx had seen it too. She shifted closer, lowering her massive head until her beak touched Elias's shoulder. Through the link, he felt something strange, pride. Elias smiled faintly. "You think we've always belonged to each other, don't you?" Nyx's answer came not in words, but in a wash of sensation. Images of ancient campfires, wolves at the edge of flame, ravens circling above, a chain unbroken. The bond receded enough for Elias to breathe freely again. He leaned back against the wall, exhaustion tugging at him, but the fire in his eyes burned hotter. "They don't understand," he said quietly. "They think this is control, a leash. They don't see that we're both holding it." Nyx ruffled her feathers, croaking low in agreement. Silence settled over the chamber. For a moment, it almost felt like peace. Then the lights flickered. Just once, barely noticeable. Elias frowned, straightening. The hum of the spire wavered for a fraction of a second. Nyx's feathers bristled, her golden eyes narrowing toward the wall console. The surface flared to life, symbols scrolling in alien script. Unauthorized access, a ghost signature. Elias felt his stomach tighten as he recognized the faint resonance behind it. A command, buried deep within the council's network. He stepped closer, reading the symbols as they flashed before vanishing. The order was simple, but chilling: isolate the human and the predator. Terminative resistance. Elias's jaw clenched. Nyx gave a low, furious screech, feathers rising like a storm about to break. Through the bond, Elias felt her rage and his own coil together, sparking like fire on dry grass. He whispered, voice iron hard. They're not waiting for dawn. The trap had already been set. The eternal hall should have been silent at night. Its great dome shimmered faintly, crystalline veins pulsing with the slow rhythm of the city beneath. The amphitheater seats were empty, shadows stretching long across polished obsidian. But the silence in the hall tonight was not peaceful. It was the silence of predators waiting. Elias Ward returned under escort, Nyx stalking at his side. They had been summoned again, an emergency session called under the pretense of clarification. Elias didn't buy it. He felt the tension through Nyx's feathers, the way they rippled like static even in still air. The bond between them hummed like a live wire. Something was wrong. The Chancellor appeared first, Vera's crystalline form pulsing with violet and amber. Her staff rang against the floor. The council resumes. Her tones were too sharp, too rushed. Elias's gut clenched. Then, without warning, the lights went out. The hall plunged into blackness, the crystal veins extinguished like snuff candles. A single heartbeat of silence followed, then the storm broke. Doors slammed inward. Dozens, no, hundreds of armored soldiers poured into the chamber. Their armor bore no insignia. Their rifles spat streaks of blue plasma into the dark. The ambush had begun. The first volley should have killed Elias where he stood. Instead, Nyx moved, her wings unfurled in an explosion of black and violet, the air cracking like thunder. She swept them forward, and the plasma bolts curved midair, veering wildly off course, sizzling into walls and empty seats. Shards of crystal rained down as the eternal hall itself screamed in protest. Through the bond, Elias felt everything, the stretch of Nyx's wings, the rush of heated air, the flick of her feathers redirecting energy. He wasn't just watching her, he was her. His vision doubled, tripled. He saw the battlefield from the floor and the air simultaneously. Left, he barked. No, not barked, he knew. A Titanid trooper was charging with a vibro blade massive enough to cleave through steel. Elias dropped low before the strike had even begun, sliding across the obsidian floor. At the same instant, Nyx's talons closed around the blade, shattering it in a spray of sparks. She flung the soldier aside like a toy. Elias rose into a sprint, weaving through gunfire as though he had read every trajectory before it was fired. Because he had, through Nyx's eyes, through her instincts, the battlefield was an open book. They moved as one. When Elias ducked, it was because Nyx had already seen the sniper lining up a shot from the gallery above. When Nyx dove, it was because Elias had felt the heat of a soldier's reactor pack preparing to overload. Every motion was mirrored, anticipated, perfected. Delegates who had not yet fled cowered in the upper tiers, their eyes wide with terror and awe. They had come expecting a debate. What they saw was something older. Were a man and a raven fighting as one organism, one will, one heartbeat. Elias's pistol barked in short, clean bursts. Every shot struck true. Not because of human reflexes, but because he fired through Nyx's sight. Nyx's wings cleaved the air, every beat sending shockwaves that cracked stone and shattered glass. She moved not like a bird but like a storm given flesh, talons slashing, beak snapping, feathers charged with electricity. Together, they carved a path through the swarm. But the ambushers had not come unprepared. From the gallery above, a device was hurled, compact, metallic, spinning like a coin. It burst midair with a pulse of resonant energy. The shockwave slammed into Nyx's body, her wings faltering. She shrieked, staggering, talons screeching against the floor. Elias gasped, collapsing to one knee. The bond seared him from the inside. He felt her pain as his own nerves set aflame. Muscles convulsing, vision shattering into white static. The soldiers surged forward. Selk's voice hissed above the chaos, amplified through hidden speakers. Now, separate them. Elias forced himself up, legs trembling. Through the haze, he saw Nyx on the ground, wings half folded, golden eyes flickering weakly. For the first time since their arrival, she looked fragile. Selk's laughter slithered across the comms. So much for partnership. Strip away the beast, and the human breaks like glass. But then Elias did something no one expected. He laughed out. It was raw, ragged, cut through with pain but laughter all the same. He stood tall again, chest heaving, blood trickling from his nose. His eyes burned with a fire that refused to die. You think this bond is wires, circuits, a leash you can snap? His voice thundered across the hall. You don't understand at all. Nyx's had lifted. Her eyes blazed brighter, molten gold burning through the static. The pulse device whined louder, trying to crush her, but she did not resist. She absorbed it. Her feathers crackled with arcs of violet lightning. Her body shook once, then stilled. Slowly, deliberately, she rose. Each step carved sparks into the obsidian floor. The soldiers faltered. Some stepped back. The predator they thought broken now glowed like a living sun. Elias smiled through the blood. We don't break. We adapt. Together. Nyx spread her wings wide. The energy trapped in her body exploded outward in a shockwave that rattled the entire hall. Weapons flew from soldiers' hands. Armor cracked and shattered. Men and women dropped to their knees, clutching their heads as their neural links fried under the assault. Elias ran forward, Nyx's wings at his back, the two of them a single force of nature. He struck with precision, every movement guided by her sight. She struck with fury, every strike sharpened by his will. Together, they were not man and beast, they were a pack. When the last soldier fell groaning to the floor, the hall fell silent but for the crackle of burning consoles. Smoke drifted through shattered crystals. Delegates stared in stunned silence. Some trembled, others stared in awe. None spoke. Elias stood in the center of the wreckage, Nyx towering beside him, feathers still glowing faintly with stolen lightning. He raised his voice so all could hear. This is what humanity is. Not prey, not alone. We are not chained, not masters. We are partners. And together his hand touched Nyx's wing. her golden eyes locked with his. Their voices one human, one predator rose as one. "We are a pack." Nyx let out a cry that shook the dome, half shriek, half laughter, a sound that echoed in every heart like thunder. And in the shadows above, where broken lights flickered and seeing eyes watched, the ambush had failed, but the war for the galaxy's soul had only just begun. The eternal hall still smelled of smoke and ozone. Splintered crystal littered the obsidian floor, its jagged shards catching faint light like shattered stars. Where once stood a symbol of galactic unity, there was now only ruin. The great dome's resonance, usually calm and steady, trembled with unstable tones, as though the building itself remembered the battle. Elias Ward stood in the center, still breathing hard, the weight of the fight etched in the lines of his face. Nyx loomed beside him, feathers shimmering faintly with residual lightning. Her golden eyes swept the wreckage, her body tense, wings half unfurled as though ready for another strike. No one dared approach. By dawn, the council had gathered again. Though this time the atmosphere was very different. No soaring speeches, no ritual tones of unity. The Eternal Hall's amphitheater was patched with emergency scaffolds. Guards from a dozen species lined the walls, weapons bared. Delegates spoke not in lofty cadence but in frantic, clipped bursts, their fear barely contained. Chancellor Vera rose at the dais, her crystalline form fractured by stress fractures glowing faintly along her torso. Her colors pulsed violet and amber, alternating to quickly a storm of doubt and urgency. The Eternal Hall was violated, she intoned, her staff striking the cracked floor, not by strangers, but by forces who knew our codes, our corridors, our defenses. This council must decide, will we fracture under fear, or will we answer with unity? The chamber erupted in response. From the Horan delegation, their insectoid mandibles clicked furiously. Unity, you summon us to a nest where assassins strike from the shadows and demand unity. This predator brings chaos, the Emperor chorus. Rippled tones of fear, the raven laughs, the raven bleeds lightning. It is not an alliance, it is contagion. But from the Martal, the aquatic delegates who shimmered in fluid-filled orbs, came a different voice. We saw them fight. Humans and predators moved as one, no chain, no leash, a bond deeper than our kinships. Perhaps we should not fear them. Perhaps we should learn. The chamber split. Voices rising, fear and ambition warring in equal measure. Admiral Kurthik rose like a mountain, his armored plates clashing as he loomed over the chamber. His mandibles spread wide in a roar. Learn from predators. I watched my sons die on the carcass world of Zaire. They fought until their armor broke, until their blood boiled in their throats. And when they fell, the predators did not eat to survive. They played. His claws slammed against the railing, the sound like thunder. You dare tell me to learn from beasts who revel in agony? He pointed a clawed hand toward Elias and Nyx, voice shaking the hall. That thing is no partner. It is a weapon. Humanity parades it here to frighten us, to demand a seat among us through terror. His words roused furious assent from his allies. Some shouted for the Raven's execution, others for humanity's expulsion. Selkon coiled slowly from his seat, silver scales flashing under the hall's broken light. His tongue flicked the air as if tasting the delegate's fear. His voice slid into the chamber like silk over blades. Admiral Kurthik speaks from scars, but he speaks truth. A predator that can share thought with a human, that is no miracle. That is a refined weapon. Do you not see? The human boasts of partnership. But tell me this, Selk's silver eyes locked on Elias, how long until that bond is turned against us? How long until humanity unleashes flocks of such creatures, laughing as they cut down fleets? Gasps rippled through the chamber. The word flocks conjured images to terrible skies dark with winged hunters, bonded to human tacticians, tearing civilizations apart. Selk smiled thinly, coils tightening. Do not be deceived. The human says they are a pack. And packs hunt. Elias rose slowly, deliberately. His uniform was scorched, his face streaked with dried blood, but his posture was steady. Nyx stood at his shoulder, a shadow of gold and storm. You speak of fear, Elias said, voice even but resonant. You speak of memories carved in blood. So do I. He paused, letting his gaze sweep the chamber. My people were prey. For most of our history, we were weaker than the claws and fangs around us. Alone, we would not have survived. But we learned. We learned to trust, to fight as one, with wolves, with ravens, with each other. He gestured toward Nyx. She is not my weapon. She is my ally. If you cannot understand that, then you will never understand humanity's strength. Nyx lowered her head, golden eyes burning. She let out a sound low and resonant, not laughter this time, but a note like thunder rolling across distant plains. The delegates shivered despite themselves. The council recessed under chaos. No decision was reached. Fear clashed with fascination, suspicion with possibility. Delegates whispered as they filed out, some avoiding Elias's gaze, others meeting it with curiosity or even respect. But not all whispers were of diplomacy. Behind closed doors, in chambers lit by dim resonance, Kurthik and Selk met in secret. Kurthik's claws gouged grooves into the stone table. The council falters. Too many fools see hope in the predator. Selk's coil slid lazily across the floor, his tongue flicking. Hope is a convenient poison. Let them drink. Meanwhile, we show them the truth. We show them the human's partner is nothing but a beast dressed in chains. Kurthik snarled. And how? Selk smiled, silver eyes gleaming. By making it lash out. Push it. Break it. If the raven kills in this hall, the council will never forgive. The titan's mandibles clicked slowly, considering. Then he nodded once. Then let us give the predator a reason to bare its fangs. That night, Elias and Nyx remained in their quarters high within the spire. The city outside glittered as if nothing had changed, but the weight of silence pressed on them. Elias sat at the console, eyes scanning data feeds. Nyx perched nearby, her feathers ruffling with unease. The bond hummed low, restless. Something was wrong. The system flickered once, then again. Elias frowned, fingers flying across the controls. Access logs scrolled, lines of alien script flashing red. Someone had entered the security lattice, not an intruder, not an external breach. Guide. A phantom hand leading the attackers through every corridor, every blind spot, every weakness. Elias's breath caught. He glanced at Nyx, through the bond. She felt his dread and returned it with her own fierce anger. They weren't alone. Elias whispered. They had help. Nyx's golden eyes flared, a low, dangerous sound vibrating in her chest. Elias leaned closer to the console, voice iron hard. Someone inside the council opened the door. The city of Eryon Prime never truly slept. Plasma veins burned through its crystal towers, shimmering against the eternal night of orbit. From above, the metropolis resembled a lattice of living stars, a civilization humming with order. But tonight, that order shivered. Something beneath the skin of the city was wrong. Elias felt it through the bond before he saw it. Nyx's feathers prickled with electricity, her eyes darting toward invisible rhythms pulsing in the dark. They were not alone. Human delegations' quarters were too exposed, too obvious. Elias moved quickly, cloak swirling as he slipped into the lower conduits. Nyx stalked beside him, talons scraping softly on the crystalline walkways. They descended into the underlayers of the spire, where the veins of energy thickened, glowing. Tubes that thrummed like arteries. This is where it starts, Elias murmured, hand brushing the glowing conduit. Every command, every defense, every breath of the city passes through here. If someone had help in the ambush, we'll find their fingerprints in the blood. NYX croaked low, her head tilting. Through the bond, Elias felt her focus narrow. She was listening not with ears, but with something deeper. And then Elias felt it. It came as a flood. Nyx opened herself, feathers rising, eyes blazing gold. Through her senses Elias fell into a storm of signals, neural echoes bouncing through the veins, whispers of minds tethered by combat implants. Soldiers. Hundreds of them. They were scattered across the city, hidden in barracks, in shadows, disguised convoys. Their thoughts pulsed like fireflies in the dark. Not words, not fully formed ideas, just flashes, a finger tightening on a trigger, a jaw clenching before a strike, fear swallowed, rage sharpened. Elias gasped, gripping the conduit to steady himself. It was too much, a cacophony of alien soldiers, echoing through his skull. But Nyx steadied him, her consciousness folded around his, filtering, shaping. Together they read it like a map. "They're moving," Elias whispered. "Hundreds of them. Coordinated." Nyx screeched softly, her vision sharpening to a single thread of light that pulsed stronger than the others. A command. Signal. Not from Selk. Not from Kurthik. From somewhere else. Elias's eyes widened. No, it can't be. They followed the signal deeper, weaving through conduits and maintenance shafts until they reached a sealed chamber. The door bore the insignia of the Orkai, a crystalline race long considered neutral arbiters. The Orkai never took sides, never raised arms, their cities standing as sanctuaries since before humanity left Earth. And yet, inside this chamber, the signal blazed. Nyx crouched low, feathers vibrating. Elias placed a hand on the control pad. It resisted him, but Nyx leaned forward, pressing her beak against the crystal. Sparks leapt, systems shuddered, and the door split open. The room glowed with holographic screens. Across them danced streams of code, troop movements, sabotage patterns. Every ambush, every breach, every assassination attempt had been orchestrated. From here, and standing in the center, his crystalline form glowing with steady and natural light, was Minister Zorai of the Orkai. He turned slowly, his body refracting the chamber's glow. Where Vera's tones pulsed with honesty, Zorai's light was steady, cold. "You should not be here," he said, his voice clear as glass breaking. Elias raised his pistol, fury sharpening his words. "It was you. All along, it was you." While Selk ranted and Kurthik fumed, "You played the quiet judge, the neutral voice. And all the while, you were the one pulling the strings." Zorai tilted his head. "Balance must be maintained. The council grows weak, distracted by ideals. Humanity's rival, this predator, threatened to tip the scales. We only restore order by slaughter." Elias spat. "By pruning," Zorai corrected. His body pulsed white, calm, clinical. "You are invasive. Your bond is contagion. Left unchecked, it will consume us all." Nyx's feathers bristled, electricity dancing along her body. Her golden eyes burned, and through her Elias felt the primal roar of a hunter denied. Zorai raised a hand, and the chamber walls split open. Soldiers poured in Orkai constructs, crystalline golems animated by neural commands. Their bodies glowed with the same steady cold as their master. Nyx launched first. She was lightning incarnate, slamming into the nearest golem and shattering it to shards. Sparks rained across the chamber as Elias ducked under its collapse, firing precise bursts into exposed cores. Through the bond, Elias saw every angle. Nyx's wings swept wide, deflecting blasts before they fired. Elias's shots threaded through gaps in armor before they opened. They moved not like to fighters, but like a storm given to bodies. Zorai's voice echoed calmly over the chaos. "Every predator falls to its own hunger. Every human falls to its own pride. Together, you are nothing but a brighter flame destined to burn out." Nyx screeched in defiance, ramming the golems into the wall with thunderclap force. Elias spun beneath her wing, vaulting onto the console, firing downward with ruthless precision. But more constructs poured in, the chamber trembling under their weight. Then the trap sprung. Zorai raised a shard of crystal, and it pulsed with a resonant frequency. Nyx faltered mid-strike, her wings convulsing. She shrieked, crashing to the ground, feathers scattering in sparks. Elias doubled over, the bond searing him as if his nerves were torn out. He crawled toward her, vision blurred, fury boiling in his chest. Zorai's calm tones cut through. "Do you see? Not strength, not unity, just a leash of pain waiting to snap." But Nyx stirred slowly, impossibly. She rose. Her body trembled. Eyes dimmed, then blazed brighter than before. Electricity surged along her feathers, shattering the frequency's grip. Her screech ripped through the chamber, a sound that shattered glass and cut through marrow. Elias rose with her, their bond flaring hotter than ever. He smiled through blood. "You're right about one thing, Zorai. We burn brighter, but we burn together." They fought with fury, each movement amplified by the bond. Nyx tore through constructs, feathers sparking like blades. Elias fired through her sight, every shot a perfect strike. They reached the central console, sparks flying as Elias slammed his palm against the interface. Nyx pressed her beak to the crystal again, electricity surging. The console screamed. Systems crashing, Codes rewriting. Together, they overrode the Orkai command lattice. Alarms blared across the city. Doors locked. Soldiers froze mid-stride. The entire security grid bent to their will. Elias seized the comm channel. His voice, carried by the city's veins, echoed across every spire, every chamber, every embassy. Council of Eryon Prime, hear me. Delegates froze in their quarters. Guards halted in corridors. The entire city listened. You've been deceived. The ambush, the chaos, the fear. It was not Serpentine, not Titanid. It was the Orkai. The ones you trusted to remain neutral. They chose balance through blood. They chose silence through slaughter. He glanced at Nyx, her golden eyes blazing into the recorder. We are not prey. We are not predators chained. We are more. We are a pack. And the pack sees the truth. Outside, the plasma veins of Eryon Prime flickered, destabilized by the override. The city groaned, spires shuddering, resonance trembling through the air. It was as though the world itself was caught between collapse and rebirth. Delegates screamed. In panic, guards scrambled. Selk hissed in shock. Kurthik roared in rage. Chancellor Vera's crystalline body pulsed violently between colors, torn between horror and vindication. And in the nerve center, Elias and Nyx stood at the core. Golden light and human will entwined, holding the city in their grasp. The nerve center of Eryon Prime pulsed with broken light. Shards of crystal still glowed across the floor where Nyx's wings had shattered Orkai constructs. Smoke curled from ruined consoles. Their code streams warped into silence. Elias Ward stood at the heart of it all, chest heaving, face streaked with blood and ash. His hands still rested on the crystalline console, where moments ago his voice had carried across the entire city. Beside him, Nyx loomed majestic, scarred, feathers humming faintly with residual energy. Her golden eyes glowed like twin suns. In the darkness, the city held its breath. The delegates returned to the eternal hall not out of protocol but necessity. The chamber was cracked, scaffolds trembling, but its dome still held. Crystalline guards lined the walls, their weapons lowered but their stances taut with fear. Chancellor Vera appeared at the dais, her crystalline form fractured but still luminous. Her voice, usually ritual calm, shook with weight. Members of the council, tonight, the veil was torn. The Orkai, whom we trusted as arbiters, betrayed that trust. They opened our veins to slaughter, and it was not their treachery alone that was revealed. She turned, and her ember light fell upon Elias and Nyx, who now stood together at the center floor. It also revealed what humanity has become. A wave of murmurs swept the amphitheater. Some delegates leaned forward in fear, others wonder, all eyes fixed on the man and the raven. Elias stepped forward, his boots crunching over fractured crystals. He did not raise his voice to thunder, nor did he lower it to beg. His words came steady, resonant, shaped by conviction. You fear Nyx because you see a predator. You fear me because you see a man standing beside her, not behind her. You call her a weapon, beast, contagion. But you don't understand. He glanced at Nyx. She dipped her head slightly, her feathers rippling in the low light. We didn't chain her. We didn't train her. We didn't control her. Elias's eyes swept the chamber. She chose us. The words struck like a blade into silence. He continued, his tone softening. On Earth, long before our ships pierced the void, we were weak, prey. The wolf could outrun us. The cat could outfight us. But the raven warned us, guided us, lived with us. It chose us. Again and again, because survival wasn't about strength. It was about trust, about being more together than we could be apart. He spread his arms, palms open. You want to know the truth? Humanity doesn't command predators. Humanity was chosen by them. And that bond, he placed a hand against Nyx's wing, is not fear. It is a partnership. Nyx gave a low sound, neither shriek nor laugh, but something deep, resonant. A note of agreement, a promise. The hall waited. Admiral Kurthik rose, his armored plates grinding, mandibles clashing. His voice thundered. I lost my sons to predators. I swore never again to let such beasts near our halls. And yet, his gaze fixed on Nyx, steady and flinching. I saw her fall. I saw her rise, not to consume, not to revel, but to stand with him. Perhaps I have misnamed the enemy. Gasps echoed. Selk coiled next, his silver scales flashing, his tongue flicked, his voice smooth as ever. Perhaps you convinced the Admiral, human. But serpents do not forget so easily. One raven may choose you. But what of the flocks that come after? Will they choose peace or blood? Elias met his eyes without flinching. That's not your decision. And it's not mine. It will be theirs. And when they come, we'll meet them as we did today, not as masters. Not as prey but as partners. For once, Selk had no reply. He coiled tighter, eyes narrowing, but silence bound him. Chancellor Vera stepped down from the dais, her staff ringing against the cracked floor. She stopped before Elias, her crystalline form pulsing with shifting colors: violet, amber, then deep gold. Slowly, deliberately, she inclined her body. About the chamber erupted in whispers, tones clashing, colors flashing. No chancellor had ever bowed to an outsider. Vera's voice rang clear and shaken. Then let it be recorded. Humanity is no longer an observer. It shall have its seat in this council, and this raven shall stand as its proof. Elias swallowed hard, the weight of history pressing on his chest. He bowed back not as a victor, but as one chosen. Beside him, Nyx spread her wings wide. The hall trembled as Nyx opened her beak. Every delegate stiffened, remembering the terrible shriek that had frozen them in fear days before. But this sound was different. It began as a rumble, deep and resonant, then rose not as a threat, but as a call. It was not the cry of a hunter over prey. It was the cry of king calling across distance, a summons for unity. It echoed against the dome, rolled through the veins of the city, and vibrated in the bones of every delegate. And instead of recoiling, they leaned forward. Instead of terror, they felt recognition. Selk's coils loosened slightly. Kurthika's mandibles clicked, slower now. Even the amphichorus let out a trembling note of harmony. The raven's cry had changed. Or perhaps they had. Elias stepped beside Nyx, his voice carrying after the last echoes. This is not the end of fear, not the end of conflict, but it is the beginning of something greater. You wanted proof that we are more than prey. You have it. You wanted proof that predators can be more than monsters. You have it. He paused, his eyes sweeping the chamber. This is the beginning of the Pack Alliance. Not just Earth, not just the Raven. All who are willing to stand together: prey, predator, human, alien. This is your call. Silence stretched long, then broke into overlapping tones, whispers, songs. The council was not united, not yet, but it was listening. For the first time, truly listening. Elias exhaled slowly, a weight lifting, though he knew heavier burdens lay ahead. He glanced at Nyx. Her eyes met his, fierce and steady. Through the bond, he felt her certainty. They had only taken the first step, and in the quiet that followed, Elias's voice cut clear, a promise, a warning, an invitation. Remember this. Tonight was not the end. This was only the beginning. The beginning of the Pack Alliance. The eternal hall, scarred and fractured, rang with the raven's cry once more. No longer omen, no longer terror. Now, a symbol. And across Eryon Prime, through every spire and every street, beings paused, listening. The call of a predator, the answer of a man, and the first heartbeat of a future yet unwritten.